It was the morning of April 14, 1973, and the two-car garage behind Sam DeStefano's modest home on South Sayre Avenue sat quiet in the spring air. The West Side neighborhood had learned over the years not to ask questions about the DeStefano residence, not to mention the screams that sometimes came from the basement, not to notice the men who arrived looking nervous and left barely able to walk. But on this particular morning, two men were already waiting inside that garage. Tony Spilotro and Felix Alderizio had arrived before dawn. They were there to kill their mentor. Sam DeStefano was born Samuso DeStefano in 1909 to Italian immigrants on Chicago's West Side. While Al Capone built his empire on bootlegging during Prohibition, DeStefano recognized a more sustainable racket: loan sharking. By the 1940s, he had become one of the Chicago outfit's most profitable juice loan operators, lending money at rates that sometimes reached 20% per week to gamblers, small business owners, and anyone desperate enough to accept his terms. His territory covered the West Side and beyond, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars annually for the organization. What made DeStefano different was his collection philosophy. Traditional loan sharks sent enforcers to break legs when payments came late. DeStefano soundproofed his basement and installed meat hooks. He kept ice picks, blowtorches, and electrical devices. Associates later testified that he tortured debtors not to collect money, but because he enjoyed it. He would narrate what he was doing, explain what came next, perform for an audience of his own crew members. The basement on South Sayre Avenue became legendary in Chicago's underworld. Borrowers paid on time even if it destroyed them financially, because falling behind meant days in that basement. Chicago outfit boss Sam Giancana tolerated DeStefano's methods because the numbers justified the madness. Collection rates stayed extraordinarily high. Fear translated directly into profit. DeStefano brought his brother Mario into the operation and assembled a crew that included young Tony Spilotro, who would later run the outfit's Las Vegas operations, and Felix Milwaukee Phil Alderizio, a made member who served as DeStefano's primary enforcer. Under Mad Sam's tutelage, these men learned that violence was not merely functional, it was recreational. But by 1961, DeStefano's mental state had deteriorated noticeably. The paranoia that had always lurked beneath his sadism began consuming him. He accused crew members of betrayal without cause. He saw conspiracies everywhere. And then came William Action Jackson, a 300-pound outfit associate and loan collection enforcer who worked in DeStefano's crew. Jackson had a gambling problem. The outfit learned about the FBI contact. Whether Jackson had actually cooperated remained unclear, but DeStefano did not need proof. He needed an example. On September 18, 1961, Jackson was lured to a location on the South Side under the pretense of a collection job. DeStefano, his brother Mario Spilotro, and several other crew members were waiting. They beat Jackson unconscious, stripped him naked, and hung him by a meat hook that had been inserted through his rectum. What followed became the most notorious torture murder in Chicago outfit history. For nearly 3 days, DeStefano kept Jackson alive while systematically destroying his body. They used ice picks to stab him repeatedly. They applied a cattle prod to his genitals. They burned him with blowtorches. They broke his limbs with hammers. Jackson was a massive man, difficult to kill, and DeStefano took his time. The murder should have been a warning to DeStefano himself. The outfit had rules, and even made members who violated those rules faced consequences. Torture was acceptable when it served a purpose, but 3 days of sadistic brutality suggested something beyond business. DeStefano was no longer using violence as a tool. Violence was using him. Outfit leadership, now under the more reserved control of Tony Accardo and Paul Ricca, began watching DeStefano with growing concern. He was generating money, yes, but he was also generating attention. Police attention, FBI attention, newspaper attention. The Action Jackson murder made headlines. Detectives investigated. The spectacular brutality of the killing drew scrutiny that the outfit preferred to avoid. And DeStefano's behavior only worsened. In 1963, federal authorities indicted him for threatening a government witness. He appeared in court wearing pajamas, claiming insanity, shouting at the judge, throwing objects. The performance was so convincing that he was declared mentally unfit for trial and committed to a psychiatric facility. But the outfit knew the truth. DeStefano was not insane in the legal sense. He was something worse. He was unstable, unpredictable, and increasingly dangerous to the organization itself. After his release from the psychiatric facility, he returned to his loan sharking operations, but his paranoia had metastasized. He accused his own crew of plotting against him. He threatened made members. He violated the fundamental rule of organized crime: you never brought heat onto the family unnecessarily. By the late 1960s, DeStefano faced multiple federal charges related to his loan sharking operations and the murders connected to his collection methods. The FBI had built substantial cases against him, and federal prosecutors were preparing trials that would expose the inner workings of the outfit's juice loan operations. Even more dangerous, there were rumors that DeStefano, facing serious prison time and suffering from worsening mental instability, might cooperate with authorities to avoid conviction. The Chicago outfit had tolerated Mad Sam's sadism for decades because it was profitable. But profit no longer justified the risk. The order came down from the top. Sam DeStefano had to go. The assignment went to the men who knew DeStefano best. Tony Spilotro had learned his trade in Mad Sam's basement. Watching torture sessions that would have broken most men's stomachs, Felix Aldericio had been DeStefano's primary enforcer for years, participating in collections that crossed every line of human decency. Both were made members of the Chicago outfit now, trusted soldiers who understood that loyalty to the organization superseded any personal relationship. And both understood that killing Sam DeStefano required eliminating the one advantage he had always possessed: the element of surprise. DeStefano had survived in the outfit's treacherous landscape for decades, precisely because he was paranoid and unpredictable. He trusted no one completely. He changed his patterns constantly. He kept weapons hidden throughout his house and car. Any conventional hit would be complicated by his hypervigilance and his willingness to fight back with suicidal intensity. The outfit leadership recognized this problem. The solution was to use the one thing DeStefano would never suspect: his own home, his own garage, his own sense of territorial control. On the morning of April 14, 1973, DeStefano received word that he needed to meet with Spilotro and Aldericio at his residence. The pretext is not fully documented, but likely involved outfit business that required privacy and discretion. DeStefano, facing federal trial on fraud and conspiracy charges related to his loan sharking operations, had grown increasingly isolated from the organization's leadership. He was radioactive, legally speaking. Multiple indictments hung over him. Federal prosecutors had built strong cases, and there were persistent rumors, never confirmed but deeply troubling to the outfit, that DeStefano might cooperate with authorities if the pressure became unbearable. What DeStefano did not know was that the order for his execution had come from the very top of the Chicago outfit's command structure. Tony Accardo, the organization's elder statesman and ultimate authority, had reportedly given his approval. Sam Giancana, who had previously protected DeStefano despite his instability, was himself in exile in Mexico. His influence diminished. The new generation of outfit leadership viewed Mad Sam as a liability that had outlived its usefulness. His torture methods, once tolerated as effective collection tactics, now represented unnecessary exposure. The Action Jackson murder had drawn federal attention. DeStefano's courtroom antics and psychiatric commitments suggested a man spiraling toward either cooperation or complete breakdown. Either outcome was unacceptable. Spilotro and Aldericio arrived at the house on South Sayre Avenue before dawn. They positioned themselves in the garage, which connected to the house through an interior door. The garage was familiar territory for DeStefano, a space he controlled, which made it psychologically safe. He would not expect an ambush there. When DeStefano entered the garage that morning, the two men were waiting. They carried shotguns, the preferred weapon for close-range outfit executions, because they were devastatingly effective and left no room for survival or retaliation. The first blast hit DeStefano in the upper body, likely the chest or torso, throwing him backward. The second blast followed immediately, ensuring there would be no recovery, no last-minute escape. Shotgun executions were designed to be final and unmistakable. DeStefano collapsed in his own garage, killed by men he had trained, men he had mentored in the art of inflicting pain. The irony would not have been lost on him in his final conscious moments, if he had any. The man who had tortured victims for days, who had kept them alive to prolong their suffering, died in seconds. Spilotro and Aldericio left the body where it fell and departed the scene. They did not attempt to hide the corpse or stage an elaborate cover-up. This was not a murder that required concealment. This was a message. The outfit wanted DeStefano's death to be public and understood. His body was discovered later that day by his wife, who found him in a pool of blood in the garage. She called the police immediately, and Chicago homicide detectives arrived to find exactly what they expected. Another mob hid in a city that had seen hundreds of them. The investigation went nowhere. No witnesses came forward. No evidence pointed conclusively to any specific individuals. Spilotro and Alderizio had solid alibis, carefully constructed and corroborated by multiple associates. The police understood what had happened, understood why it had happened, but understanding and proving were entirely different matters in Chicago outfit cases. DeStefano's murder was classified as an unsolved homicide, though everyone from the detectives to the FBI agents to the newspaper reporters covering the story knew exactly who had ordered it and approximately who had carried it out. The timing of the execution was particularly calculated. DeStefano had been scheduled to go to trial on federal fraud charges within weeks. His death eliminated the possibility of him testifying, either about his own crimes or, more dangerously, about the broader operations of the Chicago outfit. Federal prosecutors lost their defendant and their case. The outfit eliminated its liability. The murder was clean, professionally executed, and strategically perfect. Tony Spilotro's career continued to flourish after DeStefano's death. By the mid-1970s, he had been sent to Las Vegas to oversee the outfit's interests in the casino industry, where he ran protection rackets, organized burglaries, and enforced the organization's control over skimming operations that funneled millions back to Chicago. His methods in Las Vegas would eventually mirror those he had learned from Mad Sam: extreme violence, public brutality, and escalating paranoia. Spilotro's reign in Las Vegas would end in 1986, when he and his brother were beaten to death and buried in an Indiana cornfield, killed on orders from the same Chicago outfit he had served. Felix Alderizio had less time to enjoy his continued career. He was convicted on federal charges unrelated to DeStefano's murder and died in federal prison in 1971, 2 years before the South Sayre Avenue hit. Historical accounts vary on whether Alderizio participated directly in the DeStefano killing or whether other crew members filled that role alongside Spilotro, but the essential fact remained unchanged. DeStefano died at the hands of men from his own organization. Mario DeStefano, Sam's brother and longtime partner in the loan sharking operations, met his own end shortly after. On August 11, 1975, Mario was found shot to death in the trunk of a car on the South Side. The outfit was systematically erasing the DeStefano operation, eliminating anyone who might carry forward Mad Sam's methods or, more importantly, anyone who might possess detailed knowledge of decades of illegal activity. The death of Sam DeStefano marked the end of an era in Chicago organized crime. The outfit that emerged in the 1970s was more corporate, more disciplined, less tolerant of individual eccentricity and sadistic excess. The old generation that had built the organization through prohibition and consolidated it through the 1940s and 1950s was aging out or being eliminated. Men like DeStefano represented a style of organized crime that no longer fit the outfit's evolving structure. Violence remained fundamental to the organization's operations, but it was supposed to be controlled, purposeful, invisible when possible. Mad Sam's torture chamber was the opposite of everything the modern outfit wanted to project. The FBI had been watching Sam DeStefano for years before his death, and his murder did not close their investigation. It accelerated it. Special agents assigned to the Chicago outfit had compiled extensive files on DeStefano's loan sharking operations, his torture methods, and his network of associates. When he was killed in April 1973, federal investigators understood immediately that the outfit had executed one of its own, which meant something significant had shifted in the organization's internal politics. Dead mobsters often provided more investigative value than living ones because their deaths revealed the fault lines and power structures within criminal organizations. The Action Jackson murder became a focal point for federal prosecutors, building cases against the Chicago outfit throughout the 1970s. Multiple witnesses, including former associates of DeStefano who had participated in or witnessed the 3-day torture session, eventually cooperated with authorities. Their testimony painted a detailed picture, not just of that specific murder, but of the broader culture of violence that had defined the outfit's operations for decades. Charles Grimaldi, a former Chicago police officer turned outfit associate who had worked in DeStefano's crew, became a government witness and provided devastating testimony about the torture chamber on South Sayre Avenue, the systematic brutality of DeStefano's collection methods, and the outfit leadership's awareness and approval of these tactics. Federal authorities also focused on DeStefano's relationship with corrupt officials. Throughout his career, Mad Sam had cultivated relationships with Chicago police officers, court officials, and local politicians who protected his operations in exchange for cash payments. His loan-sharking empire had survived for decades, in part because he paid for protection at multiple levels of city government. When investigators traced these corruption networks after his death, they uncovered systematic payoff schemes that implicated dozens of officials. The DeStefano case became a window into the deeper problem of organized crimes, infiltration of legitimate institutions in Chicago. But perhaps the most significant revelation concerned DeStefano's mental deterioration in his final years. Court transcripts from his various trials and competency hearings revealed a man whose grip on reality had become increasingly tenuous. In one infamous incident in 1965, DeStefano appeared in federal court wearing pajamas and slippers, claiming he was too mentally ill to stand trial. He shouted at the judge, accused prosecutors of conspiring against him, and behaved so erratically that he was remanded for psychiatric evaluation. The doctors who examined him disagreed on whether his insanity was genuine or performed. Some believed he was malingering to avoid prosecution. Others thought he suffered from genuine paranoid psychosis, likely exacerbated by years of inflicting and witnessing extreme violence. The psychological question was never definitively answered, but the practical outcome was clear. By the early 1970s, DeStefano had become impossible for the outfit to manage. He could not be trusted in court, where his outbursts and bizarre behavior drew unwanted media attention. He could not be trusted with sensitive information because his paranoia made him unpredictable. And most critically, he could not be trusted to remain silent if federal prosecutors offered him a deal to avoid prison. The mathematical calculus was simple. The risk of keeping DeStefano alive exceeded the value of the income he generated. Tony Accardo, who had led the Chicago outfit either directly or from behind the scenes since the 1940s, understood organizational discipline better than perhaps any mob boss in American history. Accardo had survived decades at the top of one of the country's most violent criminal organizations, precisely because he eliminated problems before they metastasized into existential threats. DeStefano was a metastasizing problem. His death was not revenge or punishment in the traditional sense. It was preventive surgery. The evolution of the Chicago outfit after DeStefano's death reflected broader changes in American organized crime. During the 1970s and 1980s, the old generation of mobsters who had built their empires during Prohibition and consolidated power in the post-war era were dying or retiring. The new generation faced different challenges. Federal law enforcement had become significantly more sophisticated, armed with RICO statutes that allowed prosecutors to target entire criminal organizations rather than individual crimes. Electronic surveillance technology had advanced to the point where traditional mob meeting places were no longer safe. And the Code of Omerta, the sacred vow of silence that had protected the Mafia for generations, was crumbling as more mobsters chose cooperation with authorities over lengthy prison sentences. In this changing landscape, figures like Sam DeStefano represented liabilities the modern outfit could not afford. His torture methods, which had once been tolerated as effective collection tactics, now seemed reckless and counterproductive. They generated publicity, outraged communities, and motivated law enforcement to pursue cases more aggressively. The new outfit preferred quieter methods. Loan sharking continued, but without the theatrical sadism. Violence remained fundamental to operations, but it was supposed to be clinical and invisible. DeStefano's basement torture chamber belonged to a different era of organized crime, one that was rapidly becoming obsolete. The irony of DeStefano's death was not lost on those who understood his career. He had spent decades inflicting unimaginable suffering on victims who owed him money or crossed him in minor ways. He had kept people alive for days while torturing them, extending their agony for his own entertainment. He had hung Action Jackson from a meat hook and burned him with blowtorches over a 72-hour period. Yet when his own time came, the outfit granted him what he had never granted his victims: A quick death, 2 shotgun blasts in his own garage, and it was over. No prolonged torture. No sadistic performance. Just efficient execution. The Chicago outfit continued operating for decades after DeStefano's death. But it never produced another figure quite like Mad Sam. The organization's leadership had learned the lesson his career taught: extreme sadism, even when profitable in the short term, ultimately became a liability. Violence needed purpose and restraint. Torture for entertainment was not just morally reprehensible, it was bad business. It attracted attention, motivated enemies, and created unpredictable actors who could not be controlled. By the 1990s and 2000s, federal prosecutions had decimated the Chicago outfit's leadership. RICO cases sent bosses, underbosses, and capos to federal prison for life sentences. The organization that had once controlled vast sections of Chicago's economy and political system was reduced to a shadow of its former power. And among the thousands of pages of federal testimony, wiretap transcripts, and investigative reports that documented the outfit's decline, the name Sam DeStefano appeared again and again, representing the kind of uncontrolled violence that ultimately contributed to organized crime's downfall in America. The house on South Sayre Avenue still stands, though it has changed hands multiple times since 1973. The basement, where DeStefano tortured his victims, has likely been renovated beyond recognition. The garage where he was executed has been rebuilt or modified, but the history remains, preserved in court records, FBI files, and the testimonies of those who witnessed the reign of Chicago's most sadistic loan shark. Sam DeStefano wanted to be feared. He achieved that goal. But in the world of organized crime, being too feared, too unstable, too unpredictable, carried its own death sentence. The outfit tolerated his madness as long as it served their interests. When it no longer did, they eliminated him with the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized their operations for half a century. Mad Sam had laughed at his victims' suffering for decades. In the end, the organization he served decided his suffering should last exactly as long as it took to pull 2 triggers.